Let me tell you about the case of Mother Rosie Minor. At the time where I came to know about her was later in life. She was in her 70s and was heavily involved in her church. She was a mother at the church. She was running several services there. She did some Sunday school teaching. She also ran a prayer line, which I had to learn what that was for this case. But every Wednesday morning at 7 o'clock, she would get on a conference call and lead prayers, and people from eventually at first her community, then around the state, and then they even had some people beyond Georgia's boundaries, and some people outside the United States would call in and join this prayer line. They would pray together, offer prayers, and do them together. Rosie Minor was killed at an intersection here in Atlanta by a speeding driver who was probably distracted, although we could never completely prove that. But we certainly did prove the other driver was speeding, and while Mrs. Minor was making a left turn with that circle green light, the other driver sped through, hit her, and killed her. So we represented the family of Rosie Minor in their wrongful death case against the at-fault driver. At first, as you might imagine, the family members were infuriated. They were really mad at the at-fault driver. One of Rosie's daughters was kind of our lead plaintiff, and she was like calling, before we got involved with the case, she was like calling the detective who was investigating the case almost every day. Allegedly, some member of the family wrote a threatening Facebook message to the at-fault driver. I don't know if that happened, but it was alleged. There was certainly a lot of anger from our family about the loss of their mother, which I thought then and think now was understandable. The case went a long way. Most of our cases settled before trial, but this one did not. So we got ready to try the case, to go down to the courthouse and present the case to a jury in front of a judge. And we were doing that. I was there with my client, with Tom Giannotti from my firm, with our staff, with our video guy. We were working the case. And before we went there, I turned to my client and I was like, look, you've got to be cool. I know you're mad, you've got to keep it in. Because if we have some distraction, if there's some fight or some fuss, we can have a mistrial, we've got to do this all over again. So I want you to sit at the table and mind your manners. She said, okay, Jeb, I'll do that. And she did. So we tried the case. We put up all of our evidence about who was at fault in the collision. And because it was a wrongful death case, we put up our evidence about who Rosie Minor was. The pastor from her church came and testified. 2 other mothers from her church came and testified about who Rosie had been and what she had meant to the community. So we get on through the case. I've given my closing argument. And then a lot of stuff starts happening, as it sometimes does in the courtroom, some of which I knew and some of which I didn't. What I knew about was that while the jury was out there in the jury room deliberating, deciding whether they were going to give a verdict for my clients, and if so, in what amount, the defense suddenly started getting scared because we put on a good case and because Rosie Minor was a special person. And they started making offers. And this is what I didn't know. Although I had told my client not to communicate with the defendant or the at-fault driver during the course of the trial, it turns out that they both ended up in the ladies' bathroom at the same time. What happens in a ladies' bathroom has always been something of a mystery to me. I know that they tend to spend more time in there than your average man. This is fine. I don't know what happened. But what happened in there was they came out. And while I'm sitting there trying to figure out if we can going to settle the case at this late time, my client says that she and the defendant have made up. What are you talking about? It turns out they'd gone to the bathroom and my client had approached the defendant and said, you know what? I forgive you because that is what my mom would want to do. And they had embraced and they had talked and they had this deep connection. So I'm like, okay, that's great. I kept working. We ended up getting the case settled for $10 million. So no appeal. No second case could have happened because it was a extra contractual situation. It was settled case for $10 million. And as I'm like announcing that in the court, my client is, talking with the defendant. And after the case was over, the defendant who had killed Rosie Minor started joining the prayer line. She started calling in and praying with them. She even went to Rosie Minor's church. The Sunday after the trial, she attended church where Rosie Minor had attended, was welcomed with open arms by the pastor who had testified and those same other mothers who had testified, and became a member of the church that Rosie had attended. That's not a typical story. We have a lot of cases, I'm proud to say, that end with good financial results, as that one did. But something so special on an emotional level is really cool, and I will remember that for a long time.